Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have guest Gerald Clark with us again, the bounty of knowledge when it comes to ancient history on the genealogy of the gods, Planet X, Nibiru, the return of the Anunnaki, and many of these ancient deities that were considered by millions and millions of people to be god forms, but could they very well be avatars of an advanced extraterrestrial species called the Anunnaki? I'll tell you what, guys, we're going to get into a lot of information today. We're going to talk about many of the Earth changes. I've been getting photographs from around the world of what looks like different planets around the sun and other locations. And one of the fascinating things about all these pictures that I've been getting is I've really been able to compile so much data of, okay, well, that's a lens flare and it's an anomaly because of X or Y. Not planet X, of course, but that being a variable. You know, Gerald, I really appreciate you coming on the show here with us, the Leak Project, and spending time with us. How the heck are you?
Hey, buddy, I'm doing really well. And, it's a learning process for everyone. Once you start looking at the sky, finding out the limitations of your commercial lenses and cameras. And, but don't let that dissuade you. Keep looking. It's, and like we said before, there's a lot of stuff going on in the sky right now. And probably most people aren't going to believe anything until they personally see something in the sky themselves without any optical aid whatsoever. And I get that. I'm totally down with that. But the reality is people who get awarded the naming or the nomenclature for planets and stars that are out in the field, it's not even the ones that have the telescopes now. The people who get awarded are the ones who come up with the mathematical models before they actually see it, and they get the credit and get to name it after themselves. So just because you got to use some optical aid to see what's going on or a filter or whatever, it doesn't disqualify you from what you're seeing.
You know, and right now, this image that we're looking at, this was sent to me by Todd, and I really appreciate you sending this out, Todd, because this is pretty strange. You can see what definitely looks like something to the right there, and then there's some type of lens flare on top of that, and you can definitely see the artifact there and then there. But what is this anomaly to the right? Do you think that there could be something to that, or most likely just something with the sun?
Well, when you get an image like that, it's really terrific to cover up the primary source with a little 3x5 index card or your finger or whatever, so that you can determine whether what you're seeing is a lens artifact or actually a second object there. So it's hard to say with this one. Of course, it looks completely spherical, but it does have artifacts that surround it that are also spherical. And also you can kind of look, if you hold it long enough and it's stable, as the sun moves, you should be able to see the spot move counter to the angle of incidence onto your lens. So that's another way to give it up. But that's really not definitive to me. It's overdriving the lens of the commercial camera or telescope, whatever they're using there. So it's hard to say. It is very luminous at one particular point, but that could just be the internal amplification of the light at the focal point of the lens that's causing an expanded blur circle. That's generally what we call them, blur circles, where the focal point is.
Now, folks, let me give you guys a little bit of a history on Gerald, because when I was looking at the Jetsons and the Flintstones on TV, this guy was making lasers and stuff. So, he has a lot of information on technical data, definitely an engineer by trade. So the stuff that he's speaking isn't just, oh, I heard this from my uncle's brother at a movie theater one time when we were discussing politics. I mean, so you've been involved in a lot of actual technical data. And weren't you involved with 1080 when it first came out, high definition, with some of the industries?
Yeah, I had a small team at Tiernan Communications in San Diego when we were pioneering a real-time MPEG to what we call codecs. So we did that for ABC, but probably more relevant to this area of research is I spent several years as the vice president of engineering at LightPoint Communications, and we were dealing with sending infrared beams of light from one transceiver to another through the terrestrial atmosphere. So dealing with lenses and fiber optics and how they coupled together and all the artifacts you get was something I dealt with a lot.
Now, with all this, you see stuff in Mexico that a lot of us will never have a chance to go out there and look at. I know you just sent some really cool footage on your YouTube channel, and on that channel you had some really cool temples and stuff that are just on the other side of the border there that I didn't even know exist. I'm out here in Texas, so it's stuff I'd like to see. But a lot of those things are really aligned with the stars and different planetary bodies. Have you ever noticed any of the older stuff that's connected to any planetary body orbits or something that aren't typically talked about and discussed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll give you a real quick connection from my research on the Anunnaki, which started with the Sumerian tablets. and ended up looking at the Hittites in Turkey and their involvement with Göbekli Tepe and so on and so forth. But what really stuck in my mind was the connection from Mesopotamia and then Egypt, which was circa 3100 BC, and their gods, in particular the one that introduced the calendar and writing to them, who was Thoth. Well, he shows up, excuse me, in the Emerald Tablets, and he also was accredited with distributing his priests from Egypt to start the Mayan civilization. And their god, Quetzalcoatl, was none other, which my research shows, and many people agree, was none other than Thoth. So, so that's why the civilization in Mexico is so important to me, is when you realize who Thoth was, that he was essentially this appointed teacher of mankind, starting mystery schools, raising human consciousness. He's a pretty stellar connection to those old cultures.
You know, it's funny because I was watching a film last night and I was really wanting to hope this would be a good movie, and it was just terrible. I could only watch about 20 minutes of it. And it was called The Gods of Egypt or something like that. And it had Osiris, Horus, Isis, Thoth, and some of the other ancient god forms. And it had this really interesting play on it. But when I was watching this film and I was thinking to myself, okay, you've got these ancient petroglyphs that show these god forms where they've got these animal heads and different bodies and wings and stuff. With the research that you've done, Gerald, do you think that there was any truth to that, or are they using those as like a form of symbology? Okay, the wings represent travel astrally to the sun or something. I don't know.
There was a little bit of both. Actually, while you bring that up, let me finish on Mexico. So we know the winged serpent was Quetzalcoatl. Okay, so there's a chimeric form, an avatar body, if you will, that somehow represents this Anunnaki being who's being represented as a flying dragon, okay, a winged serpent. Well, interestingly enough, in the last video I did while we were down at Palenque, and we were at the palace where they often hung out, these guys, Quetzalcoatl included. And there was a image right at the end of the first song that was done by PTP, who actually really is a great guy. I featured his music on this Palenque video. Anyway, I'm pointing up at the palace temple, and on the back of it, if you look at the image, there's a winged serpent, like a dragon, that's unfolding, kind of in a celestial display. Well, now you go back to the Colburn Bible, which we know is an Egyptian set of texts that included Egyptian and some Celtic scrolls, which is some of my fans are wanting me to read. But it describes significantly this winged serpent and affiliating it with this transition of the planet Nibiru through the point of crossing. Well, the serpent, to them, seemed to have indicated a kind of a string of pearls of planets that trailed behind Nibiru, along with all the debris field, which, when the sun lights that up, probably looks like some sort of long, elongated flying thing that's breathing fire out of its mouth, because of how the head of it would be more illuminated if it was closer to the sun than the tail. So I think that's where this image came from, and the Chinese have used it, and several people have as well.
Okay, well that's interesting. Now, see, I want to jump back to this picture here for a minute, because if you look to the right of it, you can see, what looks like a second sun there, but below that, you've got two lens flare artifacts. You've got the one from the right anomaly there, and then from the sun, and then obviously the reflection and reflection around that. But what I find interesting is there's several of these photos here, and the chemtrails are just so powerful. They're definitely blocking the majority of the sky out, and maybe it's just a refraction from all the chemicals in the atmosphere which is causing this anomaly. But this person that sent this footage in also gave us video footage, and I want to play this video footage because when you watch the footage here, you can see that what it does is it actually shows the lens flare anomalies, but then you can see that to the right stays the same. So I'd like to just play this here for a second. You can see that. You can see there's your lens anomaly there, kind of bouncing around. A lot of times people think that's the blue Kachina or the green Kachina or whatever. So, but you can see to the right there, that thing isn't moving around. That one anomaly there is staying in the same place.
Yeah, actually, I think that little moving anomaly you see is actually, it looks like they're taking the image through a window. Is that correct?
It certainly appears that way.
Yeah, so I think that's actually the reflection on the window that they're catching. That anomaly to the right was really good when it had cloud coverage over it, because that means it had to be illuminated from behind the clouds. So anytime you get cloud cover over a spot like that that's shining through, generally you got something there, and it's not a lens flare, because it's pretty impossible for a lens flare to occur through the clouds like that,
Absolutely. But you're saying that because you think that, because this is the same image that he was taking.
Yeah, it would have been really great. I'm sorry, I left my mic on. It would have been really great if he would have gone ahead and covered the sun there to see if that spot was still there.
Okay, so that's what somebody could do next time.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Whenever you see something like that, you can even take your finger and do it. But actually, a piece of paper, like, and it can be so you can't see through it, or you can even experiment with a piece of paper that lets partial light through, just as long as you're not overdriving your optics, and you can kind of start sliding it along the front of your camera until you cut off enough of the sun so that to see if that object still appears there. And then what you might do is come at it from different angles, like because it's showing up at the right, if you can bring your card down on your camera from the top right a little bit and start occluding the illumination from the sun there, you may not have to block it all the way off to be able to see it, but you probably can. So try it from different angles as well. And if it's still there after you've done that, then you definitely got something. And even better yet, if you can see it with your naked eye, of course, not that close to the sun, then you really have something.
All theme like in Mexico, are there people out there that are seeing the same anomalies, local folk, or is this kind of not talked about much out there?
It's interesting, once you get past the language barrier somewhat, you'll find out that Mexico has disclosed about alien contact and UFOs. So they're actually in a very different mindset than Americans are. They're looking at the skies, they're watching for the stuff, and they'll readily talk about any of it with you without judgment. It's a different scene than it is in America.
A lot of times, if people out here talk about going to Mexico, it freaks them out because obviously you've got the mainstream news just blasting on every channel how, if you go to Mexico, you're going to get kidnapped and abducted, and it's just, full on drug mafia everywhere out there. And I think that that's ridiculous. I know that there's certain areas out there that are kind of war zones, but for the most part, it's just a really neat culture, isn't it?
Yeah, I kind of view and I don't mean to be racist in any way, but the way the United States has treated Mexico, it's kind of been their outsourcing location for hard labor and products, just like China has been. So they're kind of viewed as the esclavadores for the big metropolis up north. But at the same time, whenever you have people that learn to live without massive resources, they find the true happiness that is non-material. And there's a lot of people here that are just beaming with a pure spirit that have not, lived a rich lifestyle where they've placated themselves with materialism. So so there's a lot of that, and at the same time, there's a lot of I don't know. There's a lot of mixed culture here too because it's a very big tourist area. As far as crime goes, I guess while we're talking about this, I haven't done this before. Mexico is kind of like the United States and the Midwest in the 60s and 70s, I would say. So maybe the early 80s, where there's all kinds of liberty and freedom that you don't get in the U.S. Let me just give you for example, and this is good or bad. Just recently, there were no noise ordinances here. So if you wanted to have a barking dog on your roof 24/7, you could. There wasn't pretty much anything anybody could do about it. You could hold concerts and events all night long, as loud as you want, and irrespective of what your neighbors thought, you could do it. Okay. Well, that's a real sense of freedom. Riding your ATV on the beach while you're smoking and drinking and blaring a siren, you can do that too, and you see that here in pockets and places. So the idea of liberty is more prevalent here, but at the same time, liberty without constraints can turn into chaos real quickly. But you get the good with the bad. And I would take the liberty over signs everywhere and somebody pulling me over, going, "Hey, what are you drinking out of that can?" You know what I'm saying? They don't do that here. So I like that. As far as crime goes, there are areas where the government and the cartel are at odds, and they usually end up in major conflicts. And that seems to be happening in the state of Tabasco and Veracruz right now. As far as I'm concerned, it's safer here than it is in the big cities of the United States.
Yeah,
now you go downtown Mexico City someplace and looking for trouble, and you're going to find it. But most of the cities are small agricultural towns. They're hardworking people. They don't do credit in a big way. If you've got enough money to build a part of your house and live in that part until you get more money to build the rest, that's how they do it here. So it may look like chaos to an American, but they don't have a 30-year mortgage, beholden to the banks either. So there's a different view on credit for the most part. Now, credit is being offered to people down here now, and they're starting to, enslave them the way they did in America and other parts of the world, but it's not as prevalent here as it was there. Almost everything is done with cash here. If you want to buy a piece of land, cash.
I've noticed this racism thing is played on all aspects, no matter what color you are or where you come from. And I think maybe a lot of it has to do with what you brought up is materialism.
Yeah, well, I see the influence of the American culture spreading out all over the world. For instance, you look at America and it has had an immigration policy that's brought people from all over the world, multiculturalism for a very long time. They get exposed to the culture of America, then it propagates back to their countries through this connection. Well, I see that big time in Mexico. The shallow real-time TV using sexism to sell stuff. It's extreme in Mexico on television. Now, we don't watch TV at all. We don't even have a TV, okay? But the cultural influences and the egoism that came from the Western culture is kind of like here as it was in the late 80s, where it's the big hair, tight-fitting clothes, everybody's going to the gym. It's really crazy, and everybody's got a portable device with their face stuck to it, just like in America. So it's really no different. But I think this cultural influence is really dastardly when you look at some of the movies that are playing that have been converted to Spanish and stuff. I mean, this is not culture to lift you up. This is I don't know. It's dark stuff. I really find that disgusting. And it's extreme, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but it makes you understand why someone like North Korea would go, okay, no culture from the outside world in here allowed at all. You know what I'm saying? Because you see what it does. It creates cultural mores that just aren't very well. They're an intentional invasion of another country's way of living and exporting your own. And I don't think it's been good at all.
It's interesting how powerful the media is. I feel like if you look at the movies and the TV shows that are out there, the entertainment industry has literally turned into this mind control industry. And I think it's more powerful than just about anything. I mean, they do these global rituals with the subliminal programming to get people at these certain vibrations, and then it's easier to control them. They can implant all these subliminal messages and influence people 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and they don't even realize it. I mean, even myself, I've been studying the media now for decades. When I was 15 years old, I was exposed to how the media controls the masses with subliminal programming, and I've built upon that for 23 years. And even today, I still look back at some of the TV shows that I used to watch as a kid, and almost every time I reference something in my mind, I'm often doing that in a reference point of thinking about something that I've seen on TV in the past, if that makes sense. So even somebody that's fully awake, like myself, I feel, media still has so much control subconsciously. So if you can do that, get rid of your TV or know what you're watching, I think that can be the best thing to do sometimes.
Yeah, speaking of cultural overthrow, I want to go back just a little bit while I'm talking about this in Mexico. I was reading the book Guns, Germs, and Steel way back when I was doing business in Turkey. And it was talking about, from 13,000 years forward, what happens when this culture met that one and how things turned out the way they did. And one of the stories that really struck me was I was actually on that particular trip when I was reading this section of the book. I was on my way down to Brazil. I was doing business down there as well. And it was absolutely crazy. I had a couple of missionary folks, probably from the Mormon church, sitting behind me on the airplane. And I'm reading Guns, Germs, and Steel. And I'm on the particular section where they're down in Latin and South America here, where Pizarro and Cortez were both sent by Spain and Portugal, or whatever trading company they were working for, to come and get the gold from the peoples of the Yucatan and down into Peru and that whole area, okay? So I'm reading this book about the Spaniards when they were sitting there at Cajamarca. This is the place in, I think it's Peru, where 148 Spaniards under the guise and leadership of Pizarro were planning an ambush against the Mayan ruler or Aztec ruler Atayapa, and he had a lot of gold, and that's what they were there for. So the fact that they slaughtered over 4,000 of them because they had guns and they had germs and they had steel. The germs actually that they got from Europe and the domestication of animals that they were exposed to absolutely wiped out those people in Peru in that area. So that's why that story really stuck with me. And the thing that really gets me in the craw is in Mexico, they're speaking Spanish, okay? They're not speaking the indigenous languages that this country was founded on. Kind of like in America, you get all the Native American tribes living out on a reservation. Well, the indigenous or the indigenous population here is somewhat treated a little better than in America, but not much. So the idea of speaking Mayan or the Nahuatl language that was here that led to the Aztecs having their language, all those languages are kind of in abeyance, okay? But all the cultural, the religion, the language, it's all from Spain. So basically, it's the Catholic Church here running Mexico, making them speak the language of Spain. So it's disgusting to me, really disgusting when you look at it from that standpoint.
Now, I remember I asked you one time because you've been getting opportunities to travel all over, invites in different locations. And I remember speaking to you about possibly coming back here to the States. And it's something that you definitely don't have any desire to do right now, huh?
Well, I generally don't tell this story because I don't like fear mongering. But given what I was doing and talking about, I felt the path of least resistance to maintaining my mission without ending up in a cage was not to stay in the territory that I believe Anvil is overseeing. And for those of you who've heard some of my lectures, I talked about Paul Hellyer disclosing these two tall whites, which I believe is his code word for the Anunnaki, that were occupying the Indian Springs base just north of Las Vegas, and had been predicating foreign policy in the United States and domestic policy since 1945. Now, if you look back at what's happened with the militarization programs, and I did this in my second book, I'm pretty convinced that Enlil's fingerprints are all over the United States. So he's, with his image of the eagle being this predatory beast watching from the sky to devour anything that's unsuspecting, well, that's Enlil. I mean, it's been his role all through history. So in the Atrahasis story, the king of the city of Sharupak, his name was Ziusudra, or Atrahasis, and he was also known to us in the Bible as Noah, was told to build a boat and get out of this particular territory in the Sumerian documents because he was affiliated with one of the Anunnaki that did not have favor of the one who claimed that territory. So he was basically told to get out. And so he made up this story, and told the people, he was the king, by the way, and he told them, hey, I got to leave because my god Enki, who turns out to be his father, by the way, his domain is in Africa, and I can't stay here because this area belongs to Enlil. Well, this is what we saw in the Atrahasis when they cast their lots and divided up the territories. So that whole Mesopotamian region was Enlil's. Well, now that you know that Enlil's running America, and he's chosen the Jews as the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob from the Old Testament, Enlil is the destructive God of wrath and vengeance of the Old Testament, for those of you that aren't listening to me. I've said it I don't know how many times. Well, he's running America, okay? So me doing this kind of mission, you can expect what happened to my path financially, opportunistic-wise, you name it, what was coming my way. And we finally said, you know what? Enough is enough. Let's go to a place where we can have the freedom to continue this mission as long as possible. And that's why I came here.
I interviewed Dr. Daniels the other day, Dr. Jennifer Daniels, and she went from doctor to terrorist because, well, first of all, she exposed a $30 million basically, the way she described it was bank heist. It wasn't a bank robbery, but it was a $30 million fraud within the system, essentially, is the way that she put it. And she exposed it. She was a doctor, a licensed doctor, and she didn't want to continue to prescribe medication to her patients that she felt was causing much more harm than good. And she wouldn't give up her license, so they basically took it, put her on a do not work list, then put her on another do not work list or do not employ list, and then they put her on a terrorist watch list. Yes, so it's absolutely astonishing if in the good old USA, the land of the free, if you want to help people and expose the truth, well, you're considered a terrorist.
Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. Listen, I've exposed the three world's religions being propped up by an ancient astronaut who was the god of wrath and vengeance. And if you read the Atrahasis, he almost wiped every human out. He's a genocidal murderer, and he's promoted himself as God. These people have bought into it through the religions. And I'm not against people being seekers, okay? But once they get through being dragged through hell, they'll probably become finders. But that's generally what happens. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by any of it.
I mean, I love America. I absolutely do. And that's why I am outspoken sometimes, because back in the 80s and the 90s and the 70s and the 60s and before, it wasn't like this. With the research that you've done, you've uncovered that the God talked about in the Old Testament is actually an astronaut. And it does. Like, you read the Old Testament, and he specifically states in the Old Testament that he's jealous.
Yeah, well, once you realize he was ranked number 50 on the Anunnaki Council, and there were 11 other beings on there, and he had a half-brother who he didn't get along with, and all the other shenanigans that are going on, you go, what in the hell have I bought into? Well, when you go beyond the Anunnaki, you find out that there is a concept of a creator of all. They weren't it, but they still had to operate to the same rules that you and I do in this evolutionary simulator. They were much farther along than we are, so they played us like puppets. And they still are, by the way.
been talking about a lot of the Earth changes, and let's jump back over to the possible return of Nibiru for a minute, because let's just get rid of all the photos. Let's say that every picture that's out there is an anomaly or a fake or photoshopped or just some type of lens flare. There's still a lot of data that points to there being a planetary body in our solar system. And there's people that are coming out with, information saying, okay, this is where we got this data to point to that possibility. There's tons of Earth changes going on right now. Some people think it's the possibility of it being the expanding Earth hypothesis and other different anomalies, but could it very well be the gravitational effects of this giant planet coming closer to our own? What's your take on that, Gerald?
Well, I just recently did a show on a orbital report that I did last year with you, and we walked through the math. We brought forward the data from the IRAS scope from the two top scientists that were commissioned to deal with this. They believed there was a body out there, and they basically, by 1992, had gotten to the place where all they were left to do was name it. So this is not some conspiracy theory. This is real science. As a matter of fact, you can go back to Carlos Muñoz. He was doing his models and predictions and he released it in 1940. I just watched a video on it. And he was doing an approximation where he thought Herculobus, that's what he called it, where it was. And it was interesting to note on his map, based on everything that he could garner without having access to all his telescopes and everything, he came out with 32 billion miles from the sun at aphelion. I thought that was very impressive. And he had all the models to show it passing, and he believed it was going to be extremely destructive. This was in 1940. Well, we have instruments recording gravitational anomalies on Neptune and Uranus that, by the way, were the same magnitude and the same displacement on recorded instruments that have been going back all the way back to the turn of the century. That's a real issue. There's something out there that's pulling Neptune and Uranus occasionally out of its orbit when it reaches a certain location relative to where it's facing this object. So they kind of know what direction to look, and they have for a very long time. And this has been going on since, was it the guy who founded the Lowell Institute, or the Level Observatory? It goes all the way back to Percival Lovell. He was working on this way back when. So this isn't, like I said, it's not something new. The best data source that the public can get access to, though, is oftentimes what gets leaked to the newspapers. You're not going to get this from their internal journals and their private papers and their personal articles that they're writing, probably for many years later. So that's the best we could kind of start with. Well, what we got was pretty seminal in 1981 from Harrington and Neugebauer. One was at the United States Naval Observatory, and the other was at Caltech, working with JPL. That was Neugebauer. Anyway, and we did an update based on what they had released to us. They found the body, and it was probably circa 1978. When you look at his Dr. Harrington's interview with Zechariah Sitchin, it looked like it was around 1978, because he said he'd been searching for 12 years based on the time when they got together in August of 1990. So 78, 12 years, that's 1990. So he'd been searching from 1978 until that point with both of the probes. I think it's Pioneer 1 and 2, and then it's not Voyager. I can't remember what the other ones were. But anyway, he put 4 probes out looking for this thing on various approach and exit paths for where he thought it was. So this is some serious money spent on serious space cameras and scopes, including the IRAS scope, this infrared scope, that actually happened. Now, so who's the conspiracy theorist? The people that are looking up going, where the hell is it? Are the ones who actually spent all the money, all the time, all the resources, and their careers focused on this. Okay? So I bring that up as the starting point for the data I gathered from my Nibiru orbital report. And just recently, after having done the report, I realized that because of what Dr. Harrington had told us and released, that we had 2 points in time where he specifically stated or showed where the planet was. Well, if you have 2 points, you can calculate the velocity, because if you can, you know how much time it elapsed. So we did that. Okay, and in this last show that I just did on my channel, I put those points together and then corroborated it with the data that we came up on our Leak Project show to see how much the velocity had increased as of August of 1990. Well, it had increased by a factor of 8 from its average velocity. And the bells and whistles went off in my head, because I had approximated from 4 to 7 this increase in velocity as a elliptical body comes close to the sun. It speeds up. And it speeds up even more on the outbound after it gets slungshot around the sun than it does coming inbound, but it speeds up. Okay, so there's really 3 speeds that this thing travels. The average speed in between, the speed near the sun, and the speed where it's out near its binary twin or dwarf star, whatever you want to call Herculobus that Munoz called it. And he actually said the same thing about the speed. So that's why it makes it so very difficult to approximate where it is and what it is. Unless you have eyes on the target, you don't know what phase it's in or how fast it's moving. So it's a pretty complicated model, especially since it's not on the solar ecliptic. It comes in at an angle over 30 degrees from the ecliptic. So that makes it even harder to see. You with me?
I am. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is if Planet X or Nibiru is getting close to its return of this orbit that it has, and if we start to see this thing in the air to where it's, undeniable, you have so much information on the Anunnaki, and if the Anunnaki come from Nibiru, it means they're probably still on there now. And if it gets really close, I'm just having these images going through my mind of these enormous motherships, like in the sci-fi films coming out, freaking teleporting people and then sending them in these like FEMA camps on ships and stuff. Obviously I'm kind of going off here a little bit, but if all this stuff is really accurate as far as the Anunnaki and Planet X and Nibiru, and so why not? That's probably the most likely scenario, right? If we're all starting to wake up, and if Enlil's really pissed off, wouldn't he just send his cronies once they get close enough to do his bidding?
Well, it's probably worse than that, Rex. Imagine they never left. They've set up all the constructs of war, famine, and disease to keep the population cold beyond what they need for their slave species to get them what they need, whether it's digging out the Tigris and Euphrates or building a spaceport at Johnson Space Center. We're still the slaves doing it for them. You see what I'm saying? So
You're right, man.
They've been here all along. I think because of this zodiacal house change from Pisces to Aquarius, this was their term limits, okay, the zodiacal houses were. And they didn't always follow it, but it seemed to be a guideline that they set up their temples, looked at the solstice and the equinox locations of where the sun was so they could determine where they were in celestial time. Well, these celestial times were used for rulerships. And Marduk even exposed this when he tried to assert himself as the celestial ruler of the age of Pisces when he went 24 years too early. And this brought up the arguing about, well, where are we in celestial time? Whose temple is pointing at the right spot? Are we talking about the equivalence house model in the zodiac, or are we talking about the other model where you actually have the actual transit times through those zodiacal houses, and they're different? Okay, so this kind of bickering came up. And I think because of that we're transitioning to the House of Aquarius, the water bearer sign, right? Well, I do believe this is the sign that Ningshita is associated with himself with. He was Thoth in Egypt, okay? And his father Enki, it's either one of those two that I believe are poised right now to bring in this new age that was supposed to be more like an age that was experienced in Atlantis, not a new world order of a tyrannical beatdown. So I truly believe Enki and Enlil are at odds, and they may be doing this intentionally. So we see the two extremes of the polarization in the simulator, whether it's good and bad or light and dark. They play those roles. And Enki oftentimes, from what I've seen, has always played, in his clan, much of his clan has played the light role, whereas the Enlilite clan has played some pretty destructive and deceptive roles. So I think that's coming to a head as this zodiacal house is changing. And God knows what we're going to see in the sky. This third world war that's going to ensue, according to Thoth in the Emerald Tablets, will be nuclear, at least for a while, but who knows what kind of weapons will come then. The energy weapons, the lasers, the anti-gravity craft that'll be brought out of their bunkers to really show what they can do. I think all the cards are on the table for this one.
Now, that's interesting because you bring up some really good points. Maybe they've been here all along, and whoever is ruling things at the top levels, we don't even know them. You've obviously got the big family lines that are talked about, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Winstons, the Bushes, etc., and they all kind of are related in some way. But who are they answering to? And
let's do that right now, because while it's on my mind, before I mute this mic again, I forget.
Bingo.
You just brought up something that's been on the back of my mind for a long time. I've been watching the Catholic Church venerate Lucifer. I've been watching the Illuminati venerate Lucifer, on. And you see this Lucifer show showing up on Fox on TV, and you're like, okay, what are they trying to do? Well, so I started to go, okay, well, who is this Lucifer, and does he relate to the Anunnaki that we can figure this out, right? So I started looking into this, and lots of people get really spun up about this one, I'm telling you. So I went to Isaiah 14:12 to start and go, okay, there's only one reference in the King James version of the Bible. It's still there, where the term Lucifer is in there. But you go to the New International Version, it's gone. It's replaced with Morning Star, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So So let's go. Let's just do this real quick. So the story is about the fall of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and he's being talked about as a fallen king. Well, in the beginning of that, it talks about this morning star being fallen, right? Basically indicating that something about the depths in which the morning star can go dark is the depths to which Nebuchadnezzar has fallen. And the trippy part about this is the Latin term Lucifer did not exist when the Hebrew Bible was written. So this was added during the editorial oversight of what went on in Rome before it was released at the Council of Nicaea. So they added that term in there, and I asked myself, why would they do that? Why are they trying to smear the son of Venus? Because really what they're talking about, Venus is the morning star that they're talking about. Well, Venus was none other than Isis, okay, when you realize symbolically through the Anunnaki story. And that was Enki's half-sister Ninhursag, the mother of mankind. So I'm like, okay. So why would Enlil, having editorial oversight over the Bible, be smearing a son of the morning star? Because that's really what it is. And I looked at that and I thought, well, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabu was the offspring of Enki through his son Marduk, and Marduk was the chief deity of Babylon. So, in essence, this term Lucifer is not really a name, it's a functional term that represents a bearer of light. This could be a whole clan, okay, not just one person. So, I looked at that and I thought, well, who were the light bearers? I went back to the Emerald Tablets. Thoth told us that 32 avatars came here long before Atlantis was established and saw that there already was a light-dark battle going on the planet. And the enslavers were here, and they had enslaved the primitive beings that were here already. So these are the primitive workers left over from the Atrahasis experiment that probably got away, right? They're still roaming around, and they're living in complete darkness.
Wow.
So these beings, these avatars, are from the sun soul source, according to Thoth. When you add him in there, when he joined them, that makes 33 avatars that are here to help mankind. I wonder where that 33 number has been seen before.
Right.
You understand? Like okay, so yeah. I'm like, okay, this is tripping me out. So, at the head of the Illuminati, they've got this being called Lucifer, and he's using all the symbols of Thoth, his pyramid, his incompleted mission of raising the consciousness of mankind with the all-seeing eye on top. Listen, the all-seeing eye was Enki's eye. So I believe the symbols of the light bearers have been taken over by the New World Order forces, and they're using them to smear the shit out of them. That's what's going on. I'm telling you.
That's a good point, because you always hear about the victory from the people that won that battle. We don't hear the history from the people that lost unless we can find those little snippets that were buried in caves. And it's a really good point. Are they taking those symbols that were actually used to help, and they're using it for their own agenda? And that's why, in my opinion, a lot of these religions preach do not do anything outside of your typical senses. Like, I know so many people that are, because of their religious beliefs, they even have these natural abilities to like literally use their sixth sense, yet they suppress it because they feel that that's something of the devil or something evil. Well, maybe these religions were created to suppress people's abilities when, oh man, I can actually do something. Oh, that's from the devil. You're going to be possessed and you're going to spend the rest of eternity in hell.
Well, you bring up an extremely good point. Let's look at the three creators that were involved, and I'm talking genetically. That doesn't mean they're the creator of all, okay? They're geneticists. They're manipulators of existing life. We have them here today all over the planet. Okay, don't be surprised.
Good point.
Enki, his half-sister Ninmah, who was the medical officer, and his son Ningshita, the geneticist, were involved in the creation of the primitive workers to help the Anunnaki. Now, let's take Isis, for instance. That's what she was known as in Egypt. Now she's been affiliated with a barbarian horde that's been set up by the CIA to run out false flags and all kinds of attacks and bidding, the Sunnis against the Shias and the whole thing. It was done intentionally. So now she's been affiliated with this barbaric horde that Enlil is insinuating that she brought onto this planet and let them proliferate. Okay, that's a smear. Number two, look at Ningshita's symbols. Okay, if you go back in history, he was known as Kem Zarathustra. He was the one who founded the Zoroastrian country of Persia that his father was the chief deity of, Ahura Mazda. That was Enki. His arch nemesis was Ahriman, who was Enlil, the creator of all destruction. It didn't change. This was the origins of the Christian religion, by the way. The concept of a creator and a destroyer, a god and a devil. Well, it was Enki and his half-brother. They had summarized the highest-ranking Anunnaki members on the council and put them in their understanding of what their spiritual path was back to the light. They believed it was Ahura Mazda, not Ahriman, who was Enlil. Okay, so that's another reason why that whole area was overrun by Islam, whose chief deity is Allah. Well, he's a son of Enlil. His name is Nanar Sin, and he shows up in the Atrahasis. He's the one that led the original Ajiji miners to surround his house and ask for relief. He was the second king of the dynasty of Ur, where his father took it out on him and nuked his city and killed all his inhabitants in there. Is that your God? Is that your God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? If it is, keep following him and you'll find your destruction too. Okay, so we did Isis. We did Ningshita. So he was known as Kem-Zarathustra. He had many other names too. He was known as Al-Kem, the first alchemist, because Kem was the name for Egypt when he set it up after leaving Atlantis. Okay, what were his other symbols that have been smeared? The upright star that shows up on the United States flag, the five-pointed star, was ISIS's symbol. When you invert it the other way around, it was Ningshita's symbol. They were viewed as the most very, very, very powerful beings that when Ningshita decided to take on a new avatar form, he actually incorporated his energy and hers as the hermaphrodite. Okay, the reason he did that was to control all soul paths escaping this holographic simulator. They didn't go anywhere except through him. So when you hear about there's no way to the Father except through me, think about him and his pathway to the dweller of Atlantis that's set up the whole simulation. So all of a sudden you start seeing these parallels between the avatars of Ningshita, who was Thoth, Hermes, Trismegistus, Melchizedek, Buddha, and Jesus. Okay, he played all those roles in different bodies. And the fact is, he talks about the Emerald Tablets being able to prolong his life for thousands of years, as long as he takes a break every 100 years and goes to the halls of Amenti and rejuvenates his energy body. And he tells us how to do it too. Anyway, I don't want to get off path, but now let's go back to the three that were involved in the creation of mankind. They're getting smeared. Ningshita's symbol is the inverted star has been affiliated with the pentagram, which is evil now. The Church of Satan took it over. His Caduceus symbol that shows up in the Atrahasis, where he was the geneticist with his father, got affiliated with the medical industry for a long time. You know, the twin serpents around the pole with the wings coming out. Those are Hermes' wings, by the way. And the knob on top, which is your pineal gland. Well, that was an alchemical transformation symbol that now shows up on Baphomet and is being smeared by the Church of Satan. I could go on and on and on. This has been going on since the Middle Ages. These beings have been positioned based on their symbols, whether they're good or evil. The dragon was made evil, right? Well, it was Ningshita's symbol he chose as Quetzalcoatl in the Mayan culture. So now that's evil, right? Well, back then it was a symbol. A dragon was a symbol of kingship, as was the serpent in Mesopotamia. So all these symbols get perverted to mean different things.
Let me jump in real quick before I forget, if I can.
Yeah.
Because you brought up Baphomet, and I've done a lot of research on Baphomet. Some people that talk about the old occult symbology of Baphomet say that it's just representation of a period of enlightenment, because if you look at all the symbols on Baphomet, you've got the DNA strand, you've got the feminine aspects, the male aspects, so you've got the yin, the yang, you've got as above, so below, and all these different symbols that represent, I guess you could say, the dualistic universe that we live in. And I know that the Church of Satan has taken that symbol and promotes it. There's other people that study hermetics that has nothing to do with Satan or the Church of Satan that also use that symbol for their enlightenment rituals and other meditative purposes. With the information that you have, Gerald, is Baphomet an icon, or was Baphomet an actual deity at one point in time?
Well, this is where it gets really, really crazy in this smear campaign. Remember, I just told you, two of those symbols were false. He did the as above, so below in the Emerald Tablets. His symbol was the inverted pentagram that was the opposite of Isis's way back when he was symbolized in the Middle Ages. Okay, so it used to be the goddess and the dragon that were turned into the upright star and the inverted star. So so it's in my book, by the way. I put this in my second book. So all of a sudden you've got this Baphomet symbol that, yes, was used by other cultures before that. I believe even the Gnostics used it. There's one piece that was missing that you didn't cover, though, that really gives away who it was. We know all those symbols were Thoth, Ningshita's, okay? But there's one that was missing. In Egypt, he was known as the Black Goat of Mendes. Mendes was a city in Egypt. Well, this alchemist was known as the Black Goat because of a ritual that happened, and I list this in my second book, where the people were struggling whether to bow down to Enlil or to be open to this teacher, Ningshita, Thoth, Jesus, Hermes, who was trying to wake people up. And Enlil was doing just the opposite. Well, there was a statement in my book where it talked about Kamazaziel, who was the black goat of Mendes, was symbolized in a ritual where Jehovah was to be sacrificed a live goat as a blood sacrifice, and Kamazaziel was to be given a live goat that was to be released into nature as an atonement. So they were symbolic of what these two beings that were struggling for power over the people's consciousness was at that time. And it turns out that Kamazaziel got absolutely smeared because he was trying to help the primitive workers wake up. He's the one that introduced antimony to them in the Lost Book of Enoch. Remember that? Azazel? He got absolutely smeared for helping the humans, just like Prometheus did. So now all of a sudden you see this. Okay, so we did ISIS getting smeared. We did Ningshita absolutely getting some of the worst smearing, being affiliated with the Church of Satan, right? You read the Emerald Tablets and tell me anything in there that has anything dark to do with it whatsoever. It is some of the most profound, light elevating, conscious expanding stuff you'll ever see. It's adult education versus the parables that were given in the New Testament. And you can tell they're coming from the same being. So the other one we didn't do was Enki himself. How's he been smeared? Well, he's been turned into the devil with a pitchfork. His symbol was the trident. So all three of them that brought humanity into this plane of existence as avatars are really getting the business by the New World Order folks, which I believe are Enlilites, and I can tell you who they are, and I believe I know where they are as well. As I told you, Enlil and his son, probably Ninurta, his warrior, are in the United States. Think of the Apollo program. Apollo was Ninurta. And you can go back and see my genealogy table, my God table list out of my books to make sense of that. I just told you that Enlil was in the United States, and Hellier says he even lives in an underground base at Indian Springs, guarded by our U.S. Air Force people, okay?
Isn't Paul the he was a retired prime minister from Canada?
Yeah, he was their secretary. He was the Minister of Defense, and he served the Canadian government for 23 years.
We're trying to get him on the show. We've been actually sending him emails back and forth, and hopefully we're going to get him on here pretty soon. So that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I'd love that. I put his name on the back of my first book. I was so inspired by him stepping out and talking about what was going on, because you can look at the U.S. policy since they brought paperclip over, and the Germans that were already messing around with alien technology and anti-gravity craft back, with the projects they were working on. Well, since they won the war, they just brought all that stuff over to the United States, and said, hey, we're going to do it over here. And they took over NASA. They took over the space program. And you can see that happened. So it's really dastardly. Anyway, so now we kind of got back to Enki and Ningshita, his amazing son. Actually, that's why I wrote my second book, was because of Ningshita. He's truly a hero who stepped out on behalf of mankind. When you read what he did, he gave up a pimping gig to come down here and deal with us barbarians. I'm telling you what, I don't know how he's put up with it so long.
What do you see happening over the next, let's say, 3 years? I mean, obviously, it's presidential elections here coming up pretty soon, and there could be, Trump coming in play, or we're going to have Clinton. Who do you think is going to make it? And if so, do you think that there's going to be a big difference depending on who gets into office, or it might not matter anyway?
Oh, you're really pinning me down today. You're going to make me get political. Okay. Well, the way I see it, the New World Order forces are on a timeline. They know that their agents in high powers of authority had a certain window to do what they do. Obama's no different. I think that their plans for rolling out the New World Order are behind, and I think you're going to see some extreme actions in order to get everybody enslaved, do the culling by the end of his term. So that's a pretty short window. I think there'll probably be some false flag event, probably caused by the United States working with Israel and their other false flag partners around the world, that will create some event such that martial law will need to be enacted. It's already been done on limited basis all over the world. So I think it's just, a test for their results of what they determined in Jade Helm, how the population will respond. And I don't think Obama's going anywhere until they have declared the milestones that the New World Order has told them to. And, that's pretty much a one world government, one world religion. I've been watching who I truly believe this fallen. Now, let's go back to the Isaiah 14:12 story, and we never pinned down who Lucifer was. I've gone on and on and on trying to figure this out. And here are the final two clues. Excuse me. Marduk in the Babylonian epic of creation which was the Enuma Elish, read this story every spring in Babylon, where he renamed the planet Nibiru. He renamed it Marduk. This is the planet of crossing, okay? So he renamed it Marduk in this celestial battle that they tell about these planets running into each other in their creation account. There's point number one. Point number two, the Catholic Church built a Lucifer scope in Tucson looking for the incoming body, which I believe is none other than the planet Nibiru. Well, we now just know, and I just told you, he renamed it Marduk, okay? So now look at what's going on in Europe under the new Roman Empire that was attempted under the EU, the 10 legions of the old Roman Empire. Well, the Bible talks about the resurgence of that and then the outcome of that, and it has a very short life, remember? Well, who's doing that? Go back to World War II. Who was propping up the Nazis? Look at the symbols. It was Marduk, the son of Enki. So Enlil and Marduk have been going back and forth for a while, duking it out at a very, very sophisticated game of chess. I have to remind you, Marduk stayed in Babylon, which was Enlil's territory, went to war with him, and actually took over the Anunnaki Council of 12 circa 2000 BCE as Lord of the Earth, rank 50, but he didn't last. Something happened in 484 BC where he was killed as Alexander the Great entered the city of Babylon to take the hand of Marduk, who he thought was his father, and found out he was dead and already in a tomb. Okay, so he died in 484, but was in the tomb in 330 BCE when Alexander the Great went there. Well, Marduk was the one being smeared as the son of the morning star in the Isaiah 14:12 through his offspring Nebuchadnezzar. Nabu was one of the kids of Marduk. Okay, so now all of a sudden you realize that what Enlil's really saying in Isaiah 14:12 is he was smearing Marduk, who he believes is this light from the light bearer family of Enki, but he's fallen and now he's in cahoots with Enlil. So I think Enlil and Marduk are the two primary deities bringing about the New World Order, which is really the old world order. Go back to Rome, what it was like there. He was the deity in Rome, Enlil was, and see if that isn't what's happening right now in the United States and over the whole world. This isn't going to be just a United States thing. It'll be the whole world.
I'll tell you, we are certainly, onto something here as far as it being either magnificent or absolutely horrific. And let's hope for the better. I certainly would like to think in my heart of hearts that there's something out there that will keep balance and help those that need help, because certainly if you've got a race of beings that are so advanced that they can travel planets and create slave species and control their minds and their thoughts and just manipulate them from birth, how much more power are they going to obtain throughout thousands and thousands of years? I mean, it's just not an even playing field. It reminds me of like a professional football team going up against a middle school team. There's no way that you can compete there unless you can find a way to break outside of that matrix and become Neo, Flash Gordon. I don't know, but there's certainly going to have to be more people out there thinking outside of the box. And Gerald, I got to tell you, man, out of everybody that I've ever talked to, the information you bring to the table, as thought-provoking and mind-altering as it is, it just resonates at so many different levels. And I am agnostic. I don't know, but I want to know. Call that an oxymoron. Maybe that's the dualistic universe we live in. But I really appreciate you bringing this information to the table, and I would strongly recommend our listeners go to GeraldClark77.com. Check out Seventh Planet Broadcasting. You've got some amazing videos and podcasts on your YouTube channel. You've also got just awesome books. So I would strongly recommend going there. And you've got audio books as well. So if people are doing road trips and they want to listen to something, they can have some good data. And even after watching the podcast that we did together 3 times, I still have to go back and reference things because you're just a plethora of intel, Gerald. I really appreciate you coming on the show with us, and hopefully we can get you on again soon.
Yeah, buddy. We started stumbling onto a couple of things. Thanks for sharing the website and such. There was something came to my mind that I kind of noticed about what Mark Passio had done with the Matrix series. He noted that they asked 3 questions. What is the Matrix, the first movie? Number 2, why are we in the Matrix? That was number 2, Matrix Revolution. And number 3 was Matrix Reloaded. In other words, the Neo scene is what is the damn way out of the Matrix, because we've been entrapped in this in our skewed perception prison our entire lives. Lied to, dumbed down, poisoned, everything. So, it's no wonder that it takes an absolute crazy man or woman to get out of the simulator where they just can't take it anymore. So it's a difficult task to get beyond that. So in my books, I noticed that I think I did something similar, that I described, in the title of my first book, I said it's the Anunnaki of Nibiru, mankind's creation, or forgotten creation, enslavement, destruction, salvation, and the hidden architects of the New World Order. Well, that says it all. You know, they created us, they enslaved us into the mines and other tasks to do their bidding, not knowing they'd given us latent circuits to wake up later, thanks to Enki. Otherwise, we'd still be dumb as rocks. And then they destroyed us because we got out of control with these floods and wars and pestilence and disease and all the other things Enlil had us doing. By the way, he had them eating each other after 6 years. How long is it going to be before the Venezuelans are eating each other? I give it 2 more weeks. That's dastardly what's going on there. Where's the UN and all the surrounding countries to bring food aid to those people while they're, scavenging cats and dogs off the street? I wish they'd all go vegan, but that's what's going on. Okay, so I lost my I lost my train of thought where I was going after that came up. Wow, just a scene of what's going on there. But
no, I'm glad.
So what's the good news? What's the good news? Well, in Emerald Tablet 12, Thoth tells us after this massive war culminates that the sons of light, I think he's talking about these 32 avatars that came with him, along with himself, are going to step in and they're going to change things. And he says shortly thereafter, everyone will be seeking the goal. And when he says the goal, he means the access to higher consciousness and the evolution of your soul through multiple dimensions. Everyone will be seeking that again, just like it was on Atlantis, before materialism caused everybody to become, pompous asses that thought, they could surround themselves with the material, build security in this simulator, and insulate themselves from the brutal reality of what's going on. That's not so.
Well, and I can certainly see what's going to happen after this podcast. I know that a lot of people, if you could just mute it for a second, are probably going to, be upset because of their religious beliefs. And I can appreciate that. I respect that. And I am not attacking anyone's religious beliefs at all. As a matter of fact, I was raised Christian. And when I broke out of that mindset, I still to this day wonder, man, am I doing something wrong? Am I committing a sin for not believing? I certainly appreciate everybody's opinions, and I'm not knocking you guys in any way, shape, or form. I applaud you for what your belief is, and if that gets you closer to source, fantastic. So just take this information as you will, yet maybe look at it as an alternative option or not. I mean, do what you want with it, but it's always good to hear alternative sources, and I certainly don't have the answers. But Gerald, you certainly seem to be onto something, and this is just great, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, you kind of left the audience hanging there a little bit, and I want to clear something up just real quick. If you listen to what I said, you'll realize there were 2 clans of beings that were fighting to control human consciousness. One clan, Enlil's clan, viewed us as slave workers and never to be anything but that. Any attempts at achieving higher consciousness were stricken down big time. Well, now you got Enki and his son Ningshita, who was Thoth down in Egypt, running mystery schools, trying to wake people up, which is completely antagonistic to Enlil, who's just up the Mediterranean coast there at the Levant, where his headquarters are in Mesopotamia and in Jerusalem. Okay, that was his mission control headquarters after they moved out of Sapar and Nippur. So it's no surprise to me. But what I want people to hear is there is a synthesis between the ancient astronaut theory and the concept of all 3 religions. And you can, when you get deeply into the Sumerian documents, you'll see it and realize that, yes, there was a being that was sent into the Levant to raise consciousness of the humans, and he was sacrificed. His symbol was the caduceus, but he was tortured on a Roman crucifix, which is now being purported by that religious community to be their salvation sign. The reality was, Jesus told them to look within, the kingdom within themselves, which is exactly what Ningshita, Thoth, Buddha was teaching people about how to access higher consciousness and wake up to the source creator of all, just like you said. The religions were designed to give them ritual and sacrifice to bring in dark entities, not to wake up their alchemical process in accordance with what the caduceus stands for. Okay, that's an energetic and corporeal mixture that he's showing there that causes the expansion of the wings of Hermes, which is your pineal gland and your lateral ventricles actually working like they're supposed to in this primitive worker avatar design we have. Most people, it doesn't work. So he's showing you how to make it work, and he was, at odds with Enlil. So when you see the synthesis between what the biblical Jesus did, what Ningshita and his role and his mission was, you'll realize they were one and the same avatars, whether they were sharing the same body at the same time, it doesn't matter. These guys were immortal, and they could show up any way they wanted. And when you see the God table, you'll finally get that. But until you see their names in 2 cultures and believe they were the same entity, it won't be believable to you. So I see religion a very different way. I do see it as a control mechanism, but they left enough in there where if you were really seeking and did John 1:12, all you have to do is believe, right, and you'll receive. Well, there's also a part of that, if you go a little bit farther, where he says that you have to take that power and become. And this is the Kundalini energy, allowing it to break through all your chakras, the casting out of the 7 demons that Jesus did for Mary. That's what he did. He cleared her chakras, and then she was at his consciousness level. Okay. Well, you can't explain that conscious achievement to somebody who's going through a ritual and is not messing around with their energy body and paying attention to how that changes so that you get this internal kingdom of God that he's talking about. Well, this is not God Enlil, God Enki. He's talking about the creator of all. Because even the Anunnaki knew that there was a creator of all that they viewed as the source. And my second book details the tenets of the creator of all for mankind, what his number was, how he worked, what dimension what he was in. It's all there. So I encourage Christians to read that so they understand that, this Armageddon plan that Enlil had in the New Testament Revelations, this is a battle plan between the Enkiites and the Enlilites, and you can see it unfolding when you finally understand. So Nibiru is real. Wormwood is coming, okay? And so a lot of that is presented to people as a way to be punishing the people, but that's not really the truth. When you understand the galactic cycles and everything that was going on in the Enuma Elish, you'll finally understand that the ancient astronaut theory is really no different than what was taught in the Bible without a lot of the lies. And there's good and bad in all of it, but when you synthesize it together, you'll see that the coming of a being, the changing of a zodiacal house is really going to happen, and it's going to be different on this planet. I think I'm going to leave it there.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, right on. Well, I got to tell you once again, Gerald, this is great. Folks, check out Gerald's website, geraldclark77.com. He's also on YouTube. Pick up the books, the audio books. Great stuff. And also check out our website, leakproject.com. We've got over 200 full-featured podcasts on there that are free. Our storefront's almost done as well. We're going to have some really cool memorabilia, shirts, other things you guys can pick up with the Leak Project logo. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have guest Gerald Clark with us again, the bounty of knowledge when it comes to ancient history on the genealogy of the gods, Planet X, Nibiru, the return of the Anunnaki, and many of these ancient deities that were considered by millions and millions of people to be god forms, but could they very well be avatars of an advanced extraterrestrial species called the Anunnaki? I'll tell you what, guys, we're going to get into a lot of information today. We're going to talk about many of the Earth changes. I've been getting photographs from around the world of what looks like different planets around the sun and other locations. And one of the fascinating things about all these pictures that I've been getting is I've really been able to compile so much data of, okay, well, that's a lens flare and it's an anomaly because of X or Y. Not planet X, of course, but that being a variable. Gerald, I really appreciate you coming on the show here with us, the Leak Project, and spending time with us. How the heck are you?
Hey, buddy, I'm doing really well. And, it's a learning process for everyone. Once you start looking at the sky, finding out the limitations of your commercial lenses and cameras, and, but don't let that dissuade you. Keep looking. It's, and like we said before, there's a lot of stuff going on in the sky right now. And probably most people aren't going to believe anything until they personally see something in the sky themselves without any optical aid whatsoever. And I get that. I'm totally down with that. But the reality is people who get awarded the naming or the nomenclature for planets and stars that are out in the field, it's not even the ones that have the telescopes now. The people who get awarded are the ones who come up with the mathematical models before they actually see it, and they get the credit and get to name it after themselves. So just because you got to use some optical aid to see what's going on or a filter or whatever, it doesn't disqualify you from what you're seeing.
And right now, this image that we're looking at, this was sent to me by Todd, and I really appreciate you sending this out, Todd, because this is pretty strange. You can see what definitely looks like something to the right there, and then there's some type of lens flare on top of that, and you can definitely see the artifact there and then there. But what is this anomaly to the right? Do you think that there could be something to that, or most likely just something with the sun?
Well, when you get an image like that, it's really terrific to cover up the primary source with a little 3x5 index card, or your finger or whatever, so that you can determine whether what you're seeing is a lens artifact or actually a second object there. So it's hard to say with this one. Of course, it looks completely spherical, but it does have artifacts that surround it that are also spherical, and also you can kind of look if you hold it long enough and it's stable. Well, as the sun moves, you should be able to see the spot move counter to the angle of incidence onto your lens. So that's another way to give it up. But that's really not definitive to me. It's overdriving the lens of the commercial camera or telescope, whatever they're using there. So it's hard to say.
Uh-huh.
It is very luminous at one particular point, but that could just be the internal amplification of the light at the focal point of the lens that's causing an expanded blur circle. That's generally what we call blur circles, where the focal point is.
Now, folks, let me give you guys a little bit of a history on Gerald, because when I was looking at the Jetsons and the Flintstones on TV, this guy was making lasers and stuff. So, he has a lot of information on technical data, definitely an engineer by trade. So the stuff that he's speaking isn't just, oh, I heard this from my uncle's brother at a movie theater one time when we were discussing politics. I mean, so you've been involved in a lot of actual technical data. And weren't you involved with 1080 when it first came out, high definition, with some of the industries?
Yeah, I had a small team at Tiernan Communications in San Diego when we were pioneering a real-time MPEG-2, what we call codecs. So we did that for ABC, but probably more relevant to this area of research is I spent several years as the vice president of engineering at LightPoint Communications, and we were dealing with sending infrared beams of light from one transceiver to another through the terrestrial atmosphere. So dealing with lenses and fiber optics and how they coupled together and all the artifacts you get was something I dealt with a lot.
Now, with all this, you see stuff in Mexico that a lot of us will never have a chance to go out there and look at. I know you just sent some really cool footage on your YouTube channel, and on that channel you had some really cool temples and stuff that are just on the other side of the border there that I didn't even know exist. I'm out here in Texas, so it's stuff I'd like to see. But a lot of those things are really aligned with the stars and different planetary bodies. Have you ever noticed any of the older stuff that's connected to any planetary body orbits or something that aren't typically talked about and discussed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll give you a real quick connection from my research on the Anunnaki, which started with the Sumerian tablets and ended up looking at the Hittites in Turkey and their involvement with Göbekli Tepe and so on and so forth. But what really stuck in my mind was the connection from Mesopotamia and then Egypt, which was, circa 3100 BC, and their gods, in particular, the one that introduced the calendar and writing to them, who was Thoth. Well, he shows up, excuse me, in the Emerald Tablets, and he also was accredited with distributing his priests from Egypt to start the Mayan civilization. And their god, Quetzalcoatl, was none other, which my research shows, and many people agree, was none other than Thoth. So, so that's why the civilization in Mexico is so important to me, is when you realize who Thoth was, that he was essentially this appointed teacher of mankind, starting mystery schools, raising human consciousness. He's a pretty stellar connection to those old cultures.
It's funny because I was watching a film last night and I was really wanting to hope this would be a good movie, and it was just terrible. I could only watch about 20 minutes of it. And it was called The Gods of Egypt or something like that. And it had Osiris, Horus, Isis, Thoth, and some of the other ancient god forms. And it had this really interesting play on it. But when I was watching this film and I was thinking to myself, okay, you've got these ancient petroglyphs that show these god forms where they've got these animal heads and different bodies and wings and stuff. With the research that you've done, Gerald, do you think that there was any truth to that, or are they using those as like a form of symbology? Okay, the wings represent travel astrally to the sun or something. I don't know.
There was a little bit of both. Actually, while you bring that up, let me finish on Mexico. So we know the winged serpent was Quetzalcoatl. Okay, so there's a chimeric form, an avatar body, if you will, that somehow represents this Anunnaki being who's being represented as a flying dragon, okay, a winged serpent. Well, interestingly enough, in the last video I did while we were down at Palenque, and we were at the palace where they often hung out, these guys, Quetzalcoatl included. And there was a image right at the end of the first song that was done by PTP, who actually really is a great guy. I featured his music on this Palenque video. Anyway, I'm pointing up at the palace temple, and on the back of it, if you look at the image, there's a winged serpent, like a dragon, that's unfolding, kind of in a celestial display. Well, now you go back to the Colburn Bible, which we know is an Egyptian set of texts that included Egyptian and some Celtic scrolls, which is some of my fans are wanting me to read. But it describes significantly this winged serpent and affiliating it with this transition of the planet Nibiru through the point of crossing. Well, this serpent, to them, seemed to have indicated a kind of a string of pearls of planets that trailed behind Nibiru, along with all the debris field, which, when the sun lights that up, probably looks like looks like some sort of long, elongated flying thing that's breathing fire out of its mouth because of how the head of it would be more illuminated. It was closer to the sun than the tail. So I think that's where this image came from, and the Chinese have used it, and several people have as well.
Okay, well that's interesting. Now, see, I want to jump back to this picture here for a minute, because if you look to the right of it, you can see, what looks like a second sun there. But below that, you've got two lens flare artifacts. You've got the one from the right anomaly there, and then from the sun, and then obviously the reflection and reflection around that. But what I find interesting is there's several of these photos here, and the chemtrails are just so powerful. They're definitely blocking the majority of the sky out, and maybe it's just a refraction from all the chemicals in the atmosphere which is causing this anomaly. But this person that sent this footage in also gave us video footage, and I want to play this video footage because when you watch the footage here, you can see that what it does is it actually shows the lens flare anomalies, but then you can see that to the right stays the same. So I'd like to just play this here for a second. You can see that you can see there's your lens anomaly there, kind of bouncing around. A lot of times people think that's the blue Kachina or the green Kachina or whatever.